Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and today we are getting one step closer to covering all of the Omega level mutants that exist within Marvel Comics here on the channel by discussing one of the most notorious mutants in the Marvel Universe, which is Magneto. You know, when I was a little kid, here's kind of a funny story here. When I was a little kid, and I'm curious which one you guys think it is, I had a buddy of mine named Ace, and he and I used to go back and forth because Ace always said that Magneto was pronounced Magneto, and I've heard it go both ways, and I'm curious which one you guys think it is. I'm kind of curious about that. Anyway, as we covered in our previous videos, Magneto explained different things like that. Magneto was created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby and made his first appearance in issue number 1 of the X-Men in 1963 as the primary antagonist of the team. Now, in the coming years, we learned that Magneto's real name was Max Eisenhardt and that he was born in Germany in the 1920s to Jewish parents. As Germany came to power, however, Max and his family fled to Poland but were captured and sent to live in the Warsaw Ghetto. They did manage to escape, but his family were captured once more and the rest of them were all executed. For Max himself, he was eventually captured as well and sent to the Auschwitz extermination camp, where he was reunited with a girl named Magda, who he knew back home and who he had fallen in love with. And ultimately, the two of them would escape the camp in a prisoner revolt in 1944. Max then changes his name to Eric Lyncher. He and Magda move to Ukraine. They have a daughter and live a quiet life until some of his powers manifest in front of his employer. After that, he gets back home. The people in the town realize what was going on, and ultimately, they end up trying to lead a revolt to run Magneto out. His daughter's burned alive in the house that they lived in. Magneto loses his mind, uses his powers, and kills everybody around him, scaring his wife and sending her running for her life. Following that, Magneto changes his name for a second time, moves to Israel, and meets and becomes friends with Charles Xavier. Now, neither Magneto nor Xavier know the other is a mutant until they're attacked by Hydra forces and have to use their powers to fight them off. Throughout their conversations with one another, it became clear that Magneto and Charles had very different views on how mutants should coexist with humans, with Charles preferring the two species live in harmony with one another, and Magneto believing that mutants were superior to humans and should rule over them all, ultimately due to the fact that humans would inevitably try to destroy mutants out of fear. This disagreement ultimately leads to Magneto leaving Israel only to resurface years later as a supervillain we know today, battling the X-Men at Cape Citadel in the team's first mission. Since this time, he has remained a constant presence in the X-Men comics, sometimes as a villain and sometimes as a hero, and oftentimes something in between, but always in a position of prominence. Now, although Magneto is an Omega level mutant, he technically only has one power, although we can use it in a variety of different ways. And what I mean by that is, Magneto's mutant power simply allows him to manipulate electromagnetic fields, but this allows him to do several things in and of itself. So the most common application of this ability is the manipulation and control of metal objects. If there is a limit to how much metal Magneto can control at once, it has not been revealed, but we have seen him achieve some incredibly impressive feats of metal manipulation. For example, he moved 37 satellites in Earth's orbit simultaneously from the Earth's surface. He's also proven capable of balancing a platform weighing 2 million pounds on top of a spire only 1 meter wide. Not only that, he's easily able to destroy mountains and raise cities in an instant. Perhaps the most impressive feat in terms of sheer mass of an object was when he pulled the Breakworld bullet, a metal bullet the size of a city that Kitty Pryde had been trapped in and unable to face through, from the deep reaches of outer space all the way back to Earth. This feat took nearly every ounce of strength and concentration Magneto could muster and almost cost him his life. Magneto's also able to use his powers on a much smaller scale as well. You'll all probably be familiar with the time Magneto ripped the adamantium from Wolverine's skeleton, which would require him to use his powers with a great deal of precision. But he can actually be far more precise than that. He can actually exploit the microscopic amounts of metal in a person's body to affect their behavior. For example, he has manipulated the iron in the bloodstream of his enemies to cause paralysis, seizures, strokes, amnesia, and has even been able to control the movements of individuals utilizing only the tiny amount of metal in their bodies. He can use this ability to alter the blood flow of others and to also exploit or turn off the pain receptors in their brains. Now, on repeated occasions, and I mean a lot of occasions, Magneto has used his powers to throw objects in orbit, including satellites such as Greymalkin and the asteroid Avalon, both of which are the size of planets. He was able to disrupt the magnetic field surrounding planets and has even been able to stop Thor's hammer Mjolnir by altering the magnetic field around it. He could create extremely durable magnetic shields that have blocked attacks from Cyclops, Havoc, Cosmic Spider-Man, and Phoenix, among others. His ability to fly is due to his manipulation of the magnetic fields around him, and because of the close relationship between magnetism and electricity, he can also generate and manipulate lightning. So yeah, Magneto is super powerful. Here's the question that I have for you guys, right? Like, here's the question that I want to know from you guys. I want to know what your favorite moment from Magneto is in Marvel Comics. And here's the reason why. Magneto in Marvel Comics is is really one of the most interesting characters, right? Just in terms of the small moments that he has, right? For those of you guys who are curious about the time Magneto stopped Thor's hammer, that actually happens a Journey into Mystery issue number 109. But as most people probably know, my favorite moment with Magneto is Fatal Attractions, right? Like, so here's the thing. Fatal Attractions is like the quintessential Magneto story. Like, it's literally the story where Magneto rips the adamantium out of Wolverine's bones. And I love that whole thing, or at least rips it off of Wolverine's bones. Like, I love that whole thing because it was like, we'd seen different displays of power, but that was the first time we'd seen something so extreme in that regard. Because the way this goes down, right? For those of you guys who are familiar with this, bear with me here, but the way this goes down is you end up essentially having this scenario where like Magneto tries to basically pull all these different mutants off Earth. The X-Men end up responding, and when they get there, like a fight breaks out between Wolverine and Magneto himself. And Wolverine is just kind of like this feral, and not really feral straight up, but like this guy who just kind of usually goes in swinging his claws, like just goes in and attacks Magneto, manages to get a hit on him, and Magneto gets pissed. And so he just like rips the adamantium out of his body. Now the funny thing about this is that Wolverine never actually screams. That's one of the big misconceptions about the story, is that Wolverine screams the entire time it's happening. Wolverine never actually makes a sound. And it's one of the things that's said in the comic. If Wolverine could scream, like he'd be screaming for dear life or something along those lines, but there's no sound that's made. And the result is that like Xavier freaks out, he loses his mind, and he ends up shutting down the mind of Magneto, which ultimately leads into the Onslaught saga. But it's one of the coolest things ever, right? Because like while it was like crazy, right? It was 1990s comics, right? So it was like super high octane, fast paced, all that kind of stuff. While it was kind of crazy, at the end of the day, it's probably one of the most, if not the single most iconic moments of Magneto. Because you've basically got that moment where he's like standing over Wolverine, Wolverine's laying on the ground, and like the adamantium is basically just like being pulled out of his body. It's kind of bonkers. Ultimately, Wolverine went on to become the feral version of himself, where he's just like running around in the woods with no nose and bone claws. Fun fact, it was the first time that we learned Wolverine had bone claws. We didn't know that before. We always assumed his claws were given to him by virtue of adamantium, and they were never originally part of his body. But it's kind of nuts when you get into it, because you're talking about a super iconic moment with his character. The only moment that I think would be comparable to this was actually a story that almost nobody knows about, called Magneto Dark Seduction. And this was like a really cool story from back in the day, right? This story came out eons ago. It was actually in 2000 when it was released, so it was like 19 years ago. But there's a point where Magneto faces off against the Avengers, right? So like Iron Man, She-Hulk. I want to say that like Hank Pym was part of it, Carol Danvers. He faces off against all these characters and reverses the blood flow of their bodies. And like, it's pretty nuts because it just leaves them like writhing in agony. And like that kind of thing was insane, right? To like single-handedly topple the Avengers. We've seen Magneto do stuff like that before, right? And that's one of the things we talked about a second ago. It's like he's faced off against multiple teams over the years. It's actually one of the ways that Marvel kept him popular, was having him cross over and face off against a bunch of different superhero teams as opposed to just the X-Men. But I'm curious which one you guys like the most, right? Like, I'm curious what your all stance is, like which moment you think is the most iconic in the history of Magneto. And like, feel free to do your Google searches, right? I mean, you know, it's like, I mean, I don't know how many of you guys know like your favorite moments of Magneto off the top of your head, or like know his most iconic moments or something like that. Maybe you guys know a lot. I mean, maybe you guys know all that stuff. I have no clue. But those are my top two moments. I mean, there are obvious ones like him ripping Apocalypse in half, different things like that. But I'm curious which one you guys prefer the most. Like, which one you guys think are the most iconic moments of Magneto in the history of Marvel Comics. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.